Good afternoon. My name is Bo Khan, and I am the ConocoPhillips Petroleum Associate Professor of Chinese and Asian Studies and a co-director of the OU Institute for U.S.-China Issues. Welcome to the Institute's speaker series on STEEP issues, which promote dialogue on security, technology, economic, environmental, public health, and political issues in U.S.-China relations. Before we start our program, let me first thank my colleagues Stephanie Sager and Maura McAndrew for providing the logistical assistance that has made this event possible. It gives me a great pleasure to kick off our STEEP discussions by introducing to you Dr. Zhang, the Institute's Newman Post-doctoral Fellow. She joined us in September after completing a pre-doctoral fellowship at the Stanford University and earning a doctorate degree in political science from the Tulane University. Her research is focused on state business relations in China, and today's talk is part of her book project, Wealth Without Power, The Rise of Chinese Private Business Elites and the Relationship to the Communist Party. The project examines how the CCP co-opts and controls the rising super rich in China to generate prosperity and prevent state capture simultaneously. Recent developments in China make today's discussion very timely. As you may know, China has engaged in a broad campaign over the past couple months to rein in some of the biggest private businesses across a wide range of industries. The most famous of which include Alibaba, Tencent, Didi, and Meituan, the food delivery giant. This broad crackdown has not only wiped billions of dollars off the stocks of many of these public listed companies at home and abroad, but also contributed, together with the COVID restrictions and energy shortages, to the country's economic slowdown. As a result, this crackdown has not only alarmed investors around the world enthusiastic about the Chinese stock markets, but also raised concerns that China is reversing its decade-long commitment to market-friendly policies. Having conducted 93 in-depth interviews with business elites, scholars, and government officials in China, Dr. Zhu will share her insights about some of the fundamental factors that shape the current dynamics in state-private business relations in China. Before turning the podium to Dr. Zhu, let me also alert you to a pair of upcoming talks on the role of technologies in U.S.-China relations. On September the 3rd, Dennis Seaman, Senior Advisor to the President for China Affairs at Duke University, will join our series and discuss the expanded role of science and technology and education in China's Belt and Road Initiative and implications for the United States. On December 1st, we will host Mark Cohen, Distinguished Senior Fellow and Director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology at the University of California, Berkeley, for a discussion about the intellectual property rights and the U.S.-China technological rivalry. Please mark your calendar and look out for invitations. Without further ado, let me turn over to Dr. Zhu. Dr. Zhu, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Let me share the screen with all of you first. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Professor Kong, for your very kind introductions and the background introductions. And thank you very much for everyone joining this webinar. And I'm very grateful for this privileged fellowship opportunities at Institute for U.S.-China Relations. And also, it is great honor for me to have this opportunity to talk some of my research based on my first book project, as titled Wealth Without Power. But today I'll focus on a slightly different angle and asking whether there's state capture in China and examine the relationship between China's private super rich and their relationship to the Communist Party. So in the studies of relationship between state and business, there is a set of literature that focus on state capture. The term was first used by many scholars, by two scholars at World Bank around 2000, and to describe the political and business corruption situation in Russia and Central Asia countries making the transition from the Soviet. So my research is based on this set of literature and mainly use the Soviet and the post-Soviet states as shadow case and to examine the relationship between China's private super rich and their relationship to the Communist Party. So first of all, what is state capture and why I keep a question mark in the title? And defined by scholars at World Bank, state capture referred to a special type of corruptions that taken on the extreme formations that of so-called oligarchs manipulating policy formations and even shaping the emergent rules of the game to their very own and very substantial advantage. So one of the very famous example of state capture is Russia's 1996 presidential election. So during the election, one of the most famous oligarchs at the time, Boris Berezovsky, claimed personally to have secured the re-election of Yeltsin in 1996 through the media campaign that he has sponsored. And Yeltsin won his second term as the president due to Berezovsky's support of the TV networks and also the money from business elites in Russia. And after that, Berezovsky's and also many other oligarchs in the circle were able to have their own ministers, officials, and deputies in the government. And also at the same time, we can see that the state of Russia itself has been privatized. Especially all the important decisions have been made or have been taken by a small group of financial elites. So we can find the similar cases in many other post-Soviet states and in many other East European countries that the elites are preying on the states, such as Bulgaria and Hungary. And even in new democracies, large business maintains strong influence over the state and the politics, like Zaibazu in Japan and Chaebols in South Korea. Also, in new developing countries like Africa, one of my colleagues at Tulane, he studied crystal ventures in Rwanda and find out that private business and the state government are closely locked into each other in order to achieve economic growth in the post-conflict society. Then how about China? When Jack Ma, chairman of Alibaba, met President-elect Trump at that time in January 2017, even before many other Chinese top leaders paid a visit to the US and met with Trump, he actually was the first one met with President-elect first, and then that caused a lot of media attention. So the question is, does that mean Chinese business elites gain more power than before? And does that mean that they were able to enter the politics and try to have ability to capture the state? So I titled my talk, State Capture in China with a question mark. Because first of all, I think it is very important to realize that for the Chinese politics, especially the elite politics in China, actually what we know is very little. Even though we might already have answer to this question, but still it is a very opaque system. And second of all, the relationship between the state and the business in China actually is an ongoing event. So the game between the two, or the relationship between the two, actually is very dynamic and then changing over time. On one hand, and we can see that over the past 4 decades, China has undergone historical transformations. Once illegal, its private business sector now comprises 30 million businesses and employing more than 200 million people, and accounting for half of China's GDP. And the tremendous increase in the private sector has created a new group of powerful and influential entrepreneur billionaires like Jack Ma, Pony Ma. As this figure shows, compared to the United States and Russia. Although as for the numbers of billionaires per million of people, US and Russia are higher than China, the numbers of Chinese billionaires increased the fastest in the past few years. More significantly, we can also see that there's increasing numbers of billionaires join the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and also the elites are also entering politics as deputies of NPC and CPPCC. The NPC, which is China's largest national parliament, and the CPPCC is the country's top political advisory body. It looks like the Chinese billionaires are taking more and more important role and a powerful role in China politics. But when compared to the others, especially those post-Soviet states, the role of Chinese billionaires in the national economy seems to be less influential than others. This table shows a comparison between China and the post-Soviet states in terms of billionaires' network as percentage of GDP. China has about 4.8%, which is much lower than Russia, and its wealth concentration is also far lower than other East European countries. So it looks like that Chinese billionaires shares a lot of similar patterns of the Russian oligarchs, having seats in the Congress, able to influence policy makings, but are they actually capturing the state, or do they have the capabilities to capture the party states? My initial or quick answer towards that is no. And most scholars in the China field, or especially on state business relations in China, will also probably say no. The current literatures on state business relations in China shows that China's rank and file private entrepreneurs has become partners with the ruling party, allowing the regime to promote economic growth while maintaining the political status quo. Also, we know that economic elites seem to be benefit from participating in China's political bodies such as NPC and CPPCC to achieve better economic performance. And in the local Congress, they are also able to protect their personal properties through local business interactions. That is to say, the Chinese private entrepreneurs has integrated into Chinese political system and enjoying a so-called cozy relationship with the party. However, I'd like to challenge this view by studying the dynamic game between the two with a focus at the elite level. First of all, I think the existing literature has only focused on ordinary private business in general and their penetrance to promote democracy in China. However, it is actually the super wealthy business people who have the economic ability to pose a threat to the regime. Other than that, instead of demanding for democracy, those elites could also try to copy the Russian model and then try to capture the state. And also, the symbolic relationship between the state and the business in China is not stable or static. So it is actually a changing and dynamic relationship. Therefore, in order to further develop my hypothesis, I asking the following questions. First of all, using the post-Soviet states as a shadow case, I'm asking why has China not experienced a capture by business elites as the regime did in the post-Soviet state that underwent a market transformation and a political change? And also, what is the changing relationship and dynamic games between the party state and the Chinese business elites? And a more important and a larger question is, how did the CCP manage to survive this long despite the development of capitalism? So before I move to my hypothesis, I would like to quickly show you some of the data and the fieldwork I did in order to do this study. I use both qualitative and quantitative data. The majority qualitative data is from my 103 semi-structured interviews with the private entrepreneurs. 30 of them are from the private sector, 3 of them from the state-owned companies, and government officials and scholars across China in 2018 and 19. Basically, in those interviews, I asked 3 different set of the questions for each of the group, and I'm happy to talk more about details about those interviews and questions in the Q&A. And besides that, I also did some archival works and collect some archivals and academic articles from the Chinese Academy of Social Science in Beijing and the Shanghai Academy of Social Science. And of course, some relevant government reports and NPC and CPP samples, sample policy proposals that was submitted by the entrepreneurs in the last 10 years. And for the quantitative data, I mainly rely on one of the data sets that I use Hurun Rich List as a reference, and I construct and expand the list for the top 500 richest private entrepreneurs in China between 1999 and 2015. So basically, in this data set, I look at their rank, which is provided by the Hurun Rich List, and have another focus on their political and social attributions, including their party membership, military background, and also their NPC and CPPCC experience. So here is an outline of my main hypothesis. Basically, I start with the historical comparison and looking at China's gradual reform and opening up, and with a comparison to Russia. And then the second one, and I look at CCP's active learning from the post-Soviet states, mainly from those scholars' suggestions and adversary towards top leadership. And then the third one, the fourth one, is looking at CCP's countermeasures towards a private entrepreneur state capture potential, and then using a disdo strategy, which is co-optates and also constrain private entrepreneur elites. And the last one is look at some variations in China, look at the difference between the central level and the local level. And then look at the subnational state capture in China. But for today's talk, I will only focus on the central level and leave the subnational level maybe in the discussion later. So the first argument I have is from the historical perspective and looking at the difference between China and Russia's methods of reform. And I basically argue that although billionaires in China and Russia have similar background, such as ties to the party are essential for their business success, the emergence of private business elites began with different type of enterprise and industries. And to test that, I mainly use the most similar comparison strategies and process tracing. And here is one of the major results that evidence I would like to present, which is looking at the origins of Russia and Chinese billionaires. And as we can see that once we divided Russia's billionaires and China's billionaires under the category of different industries, we can see that the Russia's oligarchs or billionaires mainly rise from the industries and also state business and state banks and the military. And then in the Chinese case, which is not exist in that industry. And most Chinese billionaires are actually emerged from small cooperatives, small companies and startups. And many of them are actually in the manufacturing, science and technology, and internet industries. And on the contrary, as we can see, the Russian oligarchs occupy the fields of natural resources and banks, medians, and military industries. So since many Chinese billionaires business start from scratch and they have to rely more on the government policies, and in other words, they are less powerful, has less resources to threat to the region. And the second argument I have is looking at China's learning from Russia. Basically, I argue that although the rise of China's billionaires coincide with the privatizations of state properties, as in the post-Soviet case, the CCP's active learning from the post-Soviet experience leads to a crucial difference in the speed and scope of privatizations, which prevents state capture in China as well. And in order to test that, I rely on archival works and also interviews and text analysis. So the data I have is, as I mentioned, I collect about 143 articles from China's academy, and most of the articles were written by Chinese scholars who are Russia study experts. And they have these articles mainly on discussions of Russia or Soviet models of economic reform and then state privatization, and especially what kind of lessons that the top Chinese leadership should be concerned when China is doing its own reform. So since starting in 1991, especially the CCP started to sponsor a series of studies on the new directions of Russia under Yeltsin. As for the CCP, terms such as president, elections, and liberalizations in Russia are very fresh. And also terms such as privatizations, property rights, and market economy are also very new. Although the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the experience of economic liberalization in the post-Soviet states has brought excellent reference value to China. Especially, China is also trying to find out its own direction for market liberalization and reform. At that time, China was eager to try some new methods of market reform. And of course, the CCP needed to solve its own problem of how socialism and capitalism can be coexist first. But as we can see that the CCP, as studied by many other scholars in the US, has proved that it is a learning party. This table, this graph over here shows a word frequency summary of the article that I collected in China. This 143 articles are collected in China written by those scholars, and shows that the topics that mostly concerned by the Chinese scholars in the 1990s and early 2000s are economic reform, market transition issues, and privatization. And according to those articles, Chinese scholars also began to express their views regarding Russia economic reform in 1993. And also they provide certain key important views on what China needs to be pay attention to, and also basically is the wrongdoing that Russia does in terms of its shock recipe and also unlimited privatizations. And in the end, as we know that actually China developed this three-step 三步走 and also socialist with Chinese characteristic, and in order to slow down and limit the scope of massive privatizations and market reform. And the third argument I have is about the strategies that CCP is using in terms of to both embrace but also control the private elites. So basically, I argue that the CCP relies on a strategy of co-opting business elites by providing them with seats in the legislature and encourage private entrepreneurs to join or cooperate with the party. And then at the same time, the CCP continues to enhance its state coercive capacity and relies on the strategy of using punishment against private business elites who aims to penetrate into the core of political power and fully control its new tackles. So the methods I have, I use both quantitative and qualitative methods, and use some of the OS regressions and looking at I also use a Cox-Hazard model regressions. Basically, I test how long and what kind of effect for business elites can stay on the rich list. It turns out actually the rich list is very unstable. And for those people who can actually stay longer or survive longer on the list has nothing to do with their political affiliations. Basically, this is linked to the second part of the argument, that is everybody knows that there is a strict red line that they cannot cross. Doesn't matter whether you are NPC or CPPCC members, and does not protect you if you cross the line. And for the data, as mentioned, I mainly use my data set of the top 500, which is private entrepreneurs, and I did a couple of regression models, and also I also heavily rely on my interviews data as well. So one of the interesting findings, it's not from my regression model, it's actually from my interviews, is the role of Unite Front work department. Actually, Unite Front work department, it was not in the scope of my study at all before I went to my fieldwork. And then later on, after I did several interviews with the entrepreneurs, and I tried to find out how they are selected and become the members of NPC and CPPCC, and the Unite Front work department caught my attention. So actually, Unite Front work department, compared to other organs of China, other organs of the CCP, such as the propaganda department and organization department, actually Unite Front department is relatively less significant in the social media or in the newspaper, and they are actually in a very shadowy position. So the reason the Unite Front deliberately keep low portfolio is because its main task is to reach out to many key non-party groups within and outside China in order to achieve important political goals for the party. And the goal is including to have such group accept CCP rule, endorsing its legitimacies, and help to achieve key party ends. So in this case, in the case of my study, the private entrepreneurs actually is considered as non-party groups. So basically, the Unite Front work very closely with China's private business, especially business elites. And also in terms of the function of Unite Front, it also monitors sensitive constituencies and select representatives from them who they can incorporate into the political system. That also including business elites from the private sector. And the basic function of Unite Front are to collect information, explain policies, adjust the relationship between the party and non-party groups, and also in charge of political allotment for non-CCP elites. So in this case, the Unite Front also not only select the members for NPC and CPPCC from the private sector, but they also in charge of educate them and also regulate their behaviors and their participations in politics as well. So this is the structures, bureaucratic structures of the Unite Front work department and the central level. And as we can see that the Unite Front work department and the UFWD was under the direct leadership of the CCP Central Commitment. And under the Unite Front work department, there's 10 different bureaus. And among these 10 bureaus, there's certain bureaus like number 5, number 4, and 6 work very closely with the private sector. Especially under number 5 Economic Bureau, it has it serves as a bridge between the other chambers, members of chambers through the ACFIC, which is All China Federation of Industry Commerce, and also other chambers of commerce. So they select the members through the ACFIC or Chambers of Commerce, and then they evaluate them and then recommend them to the NPC and CPPCC. So for the NPC and CPPCC, because it's a different functions and the nature of the political institutions, in the NPC, actually one of the tasks for the Unite Front is to make sure that in the NPC, there's about 30% to 40% members that are non-CCP members. And in the CPPCC, because it's an adversary body, so the Unite Front work is to make sure that in the CPPCC, actually the members in the CPPCC have more than 60% are non-CCP members. So in this way, actually, Unite Front has a lot of potentials to name and reward non-CCP members to both NPC and CPPCC. I also did a test and see what is the most important factors that will determine the entrepreneurs who has potential ability to become NPC and CPPCC members. And in these logistic models, as we can see, the dependent variable is the probabilities for the business elites to become NPC and CPPCC members. On the left is for the national and provincial level, which is I will say it's a central level or national level, and then the other one is the local level. And then we can see that among all those factors, if you have a connections to the Democratic parties or ACFIC or other constituencies, or you are CCP members, you are more likely to be selected as NPC and CPPCC members. And of course, if you are involved in different type of industry, the possibilities of us also slightly changed, but it's also changed over time as well. And then this one is just for 2015's case. I'm happy to talk about the different variations in terms of industry later as well. And then so for when the CCP is trying to co-opting business elites, at the same time, as I mentioned, the second strategy they're using is to constrain and also at certain times is repress private business elites. As Bo already mentioned at the beginning, many cases happened recently. It shows the party state actually turns a very tough directions on the private sector. And one of the reasons I think is because of the increasing influence from the private sector, and the CCP is worried and always very vigilant about whether they're going to lose control over the private sector. So one of the strategy they're using in the past is to give them a punishment if they notice some of them actually cross the line, or some of them actually has a potential threat to the state. So the strategy they are using is basically has three steps. One is inquiry and educate. So they will start to have a conversation with you, which we kind of all familiar with the China's politics as well. And then the second one is warn and then restrict some of their activities. And for example, the Alibaba's and Capital case, as we can see, is actually in the second category, which is provide warm and also some restriction on their business activity. And the last one is to do actual investigations and provide some punishment. And some of the cases we read in the news, such as Meituan, and we can see that they actually receive a certain punishment from the state in terms of their business activities. And as we can see on this graph, which based on my own data, it shows the drop off of the Chinese super rich over time since 2007. As I already mentioned, actually the rich list in China is not very stable, and it's changed quite a lot over the years. And many super rich stay on the list cannot stay more than 5 years, and it's changed very dramatically, especially in the last 10 years. And then this is a kind of statistic summary of the super rich list Chinese who are in legal trouble, the top 500 super rich who are in legal trouble. And then so you may wonder what is exactly the red line and where is the boundaries for those Chinese billionaires. Here is one examples that is looking at one billionaires who are actually in trouble because of his behavior and also cross the so-called red line. So this guy is entrepreneurs in Henan Zhengzhou, which is one of the major businessmen in real estate. And in 2011, he found out that there is vacancies in the mayor's position of Zhengzhou, and then he started to announce that he has interest to run for this mayor position. But as we know that the Chinese political system actually doesn't allow any so-called outsiders to become a mayor or become provincial leaders. But Cao Tian actually announced that he would like to pledge a certain amount of money and then run for a so-called a clean government. So a few days later, after his Weibo announcement, police and also local tax officers and land resource officers visited his home and office and keeping harass him and investigate his case for more than 2 weeks. And after that, he has to drop off his applications for the candidates for the mayor, and later on he had to run away to Hong Kong. So this is one of the classical cases, I will call that the entrepreneurs, the private entrepreneurs actually try to enter the politics or potentially capture the state, and then the state actually punish very hardly. So the last argument I have, as I mentioned, is looking at the local level. Everything I mentioned through my argument number 1 to number 4 are all focused on the central level, which is the provincial level and the central level. But at the local level, as we know, China is a very large country, and at the subnational level, there's a lot of variations. So I argue that state capture might serve as systematic political corruption at a local level. It might be a rational choice for the private entrepreneurs with limited political freedoms in non-democratic countries, and the local government with a need for economic growth. And for that, I did some interviews in one of special local counties, and also I used some of the data from the survey data on private enterprise in China, actually conducted by Chinese Academy of Social Science as well. So overall, this story about China's business elites and their interactions with the parties shows that first of all, the party has anxieties and always very worried about the rising of super rich in the private sector. And given the party anxieties of its potential rivals, the party states relies on the dual strategies of incorporating the business elites by providing them with seats in the Congress, and also confining them with by punishment via state machines towards the rising super rich in order to prevent state capture at the national level. And then also it's very important for the party state to stay in power. Such measures at the local level nevertheless become much weaker due to the political due to the business peoples at the local level acting more like patrons. And then China has a system of fragmented state capture due to the region deliberate engineering, a system of crony communism or crony capitalism, forcing economic growth subnationally, but prevent state capture at central level due to their lessons from the Russia case. And overall, Chinese private business elites have very limited political power, even though they have a wealth of economic resources, but they has no real power. This is why I titled my book project as Wealth Without Power. And overall, actually the role of the relationship between private entrepreneurs and the Chinese Communist Party could also provide a very important indicators for US-China relationship as well. When it comes to the state business relations in China, many scholars in the US actually in the last 10 years especially try to answer this question, try to understand China is why modernization theory appears to be a fitting in the Chinese case. And they find out that China's private entrepreneurs have become partners with the ruling party to promote economic growth, not democratic transition. So basically, China's private entrepreneurs keep their hands down and stay away from politics and focus only on their business and making money. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party also receive tremendous benefits from the rapid development in the private sector, not only economically, but also importantly, the vigorous development in the private sector enhance its performance-based legitimacy, which contributes a lot to its longevity as a single-party authoritarian rule. However, as I also mentioned, there has been a strong undercurrents under the water, which has not been very visible from the seemingly peaceful surface. And the CCP has always been very sensitive and vigilant about the private sector and the business people, especially those elites. And some of the events, as we already mentioned, Beijing's crackdown on Jack Ma and other few major China tech companies started to show that Beijing's move and direction towards private entrepreneurs is probably just the tip of the iceberg. Beijing's action shows that CCP does not want the growth to come at the expense of the threat to the rule. And this is also an important message that Beijing delivered not only to its domestic companies, but also to the world. So I hope this study, through the lens of private entrepreneurs and their relationship to the Communist Party, can also provide some valuable implementations for US-China relations as well. And I will stop here and welcome all the comments and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, for the stimulating discussion. Well, everyone is still formulating their question. Let me kick off the discussion by asking maybe two questions. First, with respect to your research project, could you tell us a little bit about what surprises you the most? Have you come across anything that has really surprised you with respect to the relationship between the private businesses and the party? And then to relate your talk to the current crackdown, is it correct to say that based on your discussion, there is actually a limit to the extent to which the party will crack down on the tech industry and the other industries? In other words, while the party has sent the message loud and clear, the party actually will start to pull back from its campaign against these private businesses in China. Is that so? Or is it true that China is actually reversing its market-friendly sort of policies that has been the tradition for the past 3 decades also? And so the question is, how do we make sense of the crackdown? Is it likely to continue? Is it likely to pause? Are we likely to see a pause now that Beijing has already, sent the message loud and clear? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me start with the second question first, if it's okay. So for the crackdown on the China's private tech companies, and also not just tech companies, and also we can see there's new regulations and everything have been delivered through other real estate companies and financial companies as well. So as I mentioned, I think the relationship between private sections and party state is always changing and dynamic. And from the party's point of view, it knows that it cannot go just one direction. It kind of like the dual strategy is always using is it's give you some carrots, but also sometimes they punish you as well, and then sending out the warnings. So I would say this trend is not goes as just one line, it's kind of zigzag. So it goes a little bit towards rewarding the private sectors, but also at the meantime, it will send a strong message to them and to show who is actually the authorities. And if you cross the line, and then the punishment or consequences as also severe. But sometimes because the contributions from the private sectors towards China's economy is also significant. So the party knows it has to, in terms of to continue this performance-based legitimacy, party also need to work closely and then from the with the private sector as well. So I would say the trend is not just towards one line or one-sided. It's actually is moving a little bit from left, a little bit from right, and I would say this is the from the party state perspective, that's its strategy. And for the first question, what's the most impressive or surprising things I find out during the study is I would say based on my interview experience. So before I went to the field, I would think people like, I didn't actually interview Jack Ma, but I interviewed a couple important, not important, like who are on who rich list around 400, around 300 in Beijing and Shanghai. I would think those people are actually very confident and they are willing to do a lot of work, not just for their business, but also to in the politics as well. But very surprisingly, they're actually very reluctant to be being involved in politics in China, because they know it is probably for them it's not very wise choice. And I asked them, most of them, they are NPC and CPPCC members. So I asked them what kind of proposals you had written before when you are the members or deputies. And most of them, they actually say that I didn't written any politics or any proposals that is benefits to my industry. I actually wrote something is for environment protections. I wrote something about local educations. And so, which is, I was a little bit surprised because of that. And also their attitudes towards carrying this very important title as NPC and CPPCC members, they seems like didn't care that much, because for them this membership, this deputies is a sort of kind of just honorary kind of title, and a lot of people actually ask whether this what are the benefits to be NPC and CPPCC members. Actually, it didn't give them much protections. The only thing in terms of legal, if they have legal troubles, actually the only benefits is the local police cannot detain them right away. They have to report to the NPC and CPPCC management group first, and so they may have 24 hours or 48 hours exempt from the being detained by the police. But other than that, the only benefits they can have is have this certain platform that they can actually talk or interact with local political elites. So that's the most important channels for them, important reasons for them to join NPC and CPPCC. But most of them, they are not that exciting about their title and their role in politics.
All right, there's a question about the real estate industry. So the question is twofold. First, can you talk a little bit about the real estate business tycoons and whether they have a special relationship with the Chinese government on different levels, local, provincial, and central government? And then relatedly, the question, the question is whether you can talk a little bit about the problem associated with Evergrande, the Evergrande Bank that's implicated in $300 billion of debt in the property market in China.
Okay, thank you. I'm not a real estate expert, and but from political science point of view, what I can say that we know that the real estate business in China is a very special field of industry because because the way there's a lot of studies actually in China field, and they're looking at the local level, local government, how the local business actually they get a contract from the local government with very, very low price. And then they were able to develop their business. So we know that there's a certain clientism exists in the local level, but at the central level, because when those real estate companies getting developed, and then they actually, it's not just real estate companies, they actually involve in multiple business, such as finance, technology, and they do all kinds of business. So the network among those business tycoons is actually very complicated. And if you are a fan of faction politics, and you probably can find a lot of data and stories that is available that is looking at a different business group, such as Mingtianxi and Hendaxi, that is related to different factions in the Chinese politics leaders. And one of the recent case on the other, not Evergreen, but the other one, that if you look at the owner or the CEO or the president of this company, actually she is somebody's cousin. So everything is have a strong network. Actually, I was trying to develop a network analysis as looking at those private entrepreneurs, especially in the real estate, and their network towards different political factions. But once I have better result, I can make a further comment on that.
All right. With respect to the current crackdown, are there any new factors behind this new campaign? And then what impact do you think the current crackdown will have on entrepreneurs' behaviors and future choices?
So I think this crackdown for most of the Chinese entrepreneurs and also scholars is not very surprising. I'm not sure if Bo will agree with me, but actually we are not very surprising about the CCP's move towards some major companies like Alibaba and Capital, because it is really become a very big and influential. And also there's certain behavior about their business is also provides a lot of potential social and economic threat in the Chinese case as well. It's a little bit like the Facebook in US. People always say it's too big and need to be concerned. So in the Chinese case, it's very similar. So I would say the CCP's crackdown or the regulations towards those companies is part of their learning process towards how to maintain and their relationship with the private sectors. But also at the same time, they have another major task is stay in power and then remain socialist rule. So they always need to walk through these two rivers and try to find middle ground that they can land it in a safe way. So I'm not quite sure the trend, and I cannot predict that. I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say the crackdown is not very surprising. If you are close with the Chinese case, you're close with looking closer with the Chinese news. I think that's the question. Did I miss the first part?
No, I think yeah. Any new factors? Can you think of any new factors behind this recent crackdown?
No.
Other than the desire to stay in power, of course, we understand the strong impulse on the part of the Chinese government to maintain power and sensitivity the Chinese Communist Party attaches to the goal here, right? But are there any other factors?
Well, also at the same time, it's not just stay in power for the CCP, but also certain because the atmosphere of the evergreen, also the collapse of the real estate companies can also cause a lot of social unrest.
Yeah.
And this is another cause that CCP is very, very worried about I would say since the 1980s. So this protest and social unrest are caused by private companies as another major concerns by the CCP. So my point of view a little bit different to a lot of New York Times. Their commentators' view is the CCP is only deliver the message, but also CCP is still try to minimize the potential social unrest and social, but also the wealth and poor gap in China. And this is another fact that they also contribute to their longevities, but also it's another fact that's sounds a little more, I think it's more reasonable.
Yeah, I think I would concur, certainly a number of other factors are also behind the crackdown. For example, the concern about data sovereignty certainly is behind the effort to crack down on Didi and Alibaba, and financial services, etc. Right? But I think the other general concern is risk control and risk management. The Chinese Communist Party is actively managing social risks and political risks, and certainly some of the crackdowns certainly reflect that concern as well, particularly with respect to the crackdown on Alibaba's financial services that actually would socialize risks if it were permitted to go ahead without any restructuring and reorganization, right? And then of course we hear this message of common prosperity coming back to surface again, that smacks of the Maoist era, right? And the ideological sort of bend. And I think in that respect, some part of the crackdown is also aimed to re-engineer social values and value preferences in China. And so I think I concur with what you said. And then there's a question about there's a comment about differences between China and the United States in terms of what private business entrepreneurs would like to do in the United States. It's almost a customary practice that when you get super rich, when you become so successful in the commercial world, you wanted to move into politics and seek offices, etc. Right? And so the question is, what type of people do make up the Communist Party? This is a question from the audience.
What kind of people do actually have a chance to get into the NPC and CPPCC? Or
I think the question probably is more along the lines of what people join the party or what people are represented in the party. If I understood the question correctly.
Okay. Well, who are more likely? I guess I would say the question probably try to ask who are more likely to join the party and then are willing to enter the politics in China. And because for US, it's the path is very clear. Once you get rich, and then like Donald Trump, he can actually run for president, and you have certain economic resources and also background to do that. But in China, if you are familiar with the Chinese system, a political system, and there's another organizations which is, I would say, is parallel to the United Front organization, which is the 组织部, the party of organizations. So the department of organizations. So for the Chinese political system, if you want to enter politics, actually you have to there's a step-by-step for the cadets from the junior level to the top level. And there's a lot of studies actually is talking about the selections, selections in China, how to become how for those Chinese political elites. But it's actually a very separate line. One line is goes through from the Department of Organizations, and then they train and also educate and also select elites from that part. But for most of Chinese private entrepreneurs, they are not within the scope of the regular regular candidates for party for organizations department. They are more treated as non-party elites, which they have less chance to become a real political leaders. So most of them, they join NPC and CPPCC. They are most of them, they are the elites in their own field, and they perform very well in their own business as well. But there's actually 4 categories for become a candidates for NPC and CPPCC if you are non-party elites. One of them is you need to perform very well in your own business as certain influence and can represent your business. Another one is you need to accept the CCP's rule and also perform your loyalties towards the party as well, even though you are not party members. And that is including, for example, if there's a campaign for there's a campaign for private aviation campaign, and then they will ask you to donate a certain amount of wealth and to help the less developed region or less developed provinces, less developed places, then they will have to do that. And so they have to follow the party's campaign and also their call and to show their loyalties. So if you following those steps, you are basically shows you are reliable and also loyal citizens, not just members, but also you're willing to work and also complying with the party state, then you will be selected.
I think you may have answered this question that asks about wealth gaps in China. So the question asks whether co-opting and controlling the private business entrepreneurs in China help China address the wealth gap, income disparities in China, and whether that effort is effective.
Mm. Oh, this is very interesting. I never think about that actually. I
thought you already addressed that. That is, over the past couple of years, President Xi Jinping certainly launched this campaign to eradicate poverty, right?
Yeah.
And then taking cues from the party, and these business tycoons, Jack Ma, Pony Ma, and all the other business tycoons, super rich, have basically one by one stepped up to the plate, saying, "Okay, we would like to help." And they basically have been writing all these checks, right?
Yeah, but I'm not sure like substantially how much they actually can contribute to minimize or shorten the bridge between the gap between the wealth and the poor. That part I don't know. But one thing I will say is actually the cooptations or repressions towards the business elites is not because the party is worried about their wealth. So in China, as you know, you can have wealth and you can have a luxury style of life as long as you, as I mentioned, you don't cross the line. So that's the most. That's one of the message that my impressions from based on my field work and interviews.
Yeah, I think the message might be, stay rich, but stay out of politics. In that sense, it's very similar to what characterizes the story in Russia, right?
Yeah.
As long as you stay out of politics, in the case of Horodovsky, the former president of UCAS, right? The moment he started to write checks for political opposition movement and throw him into prison, right? And then the example of Cao Tian certainly is very, very interesting and indicative of the similarities here.
Yeah.
Let's see if there are any other questions, any follow-up questions. Do you have anything else you want to add? You want to respond to?
Well, I would say this is still a very ongoing project, and as you can see, I try. There's a lot of elements in my argument, and I still try to further develop and become more like a book project and address to one central questions. But if from the audience, I welcome all the suggestions and feedback to help me to improve this project, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for the opportunity as well.
All right, thank you. I also would like to thank the audience for being so patient and attentive. I thank you for the questions. I think we'll end the program officially, but maybe Stephanie can help us stop the recording. I assume that Drew can stick around for a little bit in case there are still some members of the audience that want to ask questions, and we don't have to record that part. With that, we will end the program and thank everyone for the participation. And I certainly invite you to come back to our future programs on the role of technologies in U.S.-China relations in November and in December. And thank you so much. And we'll end here. Let me stop the recording.